The shrill sound of a police siren pierced the quiet Sunday afternoon as James Mitchell stood in his driveway, garden hose in hand, completely dumbfounded. Two police cruisers pulled up to the curb, and three officers approached with cautious steps. Behind them, standing with arms crossed and a self-satisfied smile, was Diane Holloway, known throughout Oak Ridge Estates as HOA Karen. "Sir, we've received a complaint about illegal water usage and environmental hazards," the lead officer said, looking slightly embarrassed. "Are you aware of the neighborhood restrictions on car washing?" James blinked, water still dripping from his half-clean sedan. "I'm washing my car, on my property, on a Sunday afternoon, with non-biodegradable soap that's flowing into storm drains," Diane interjected, stepping forward uninvited. She wore her HOA president badge like a police shield. Article 7, Section 12 of our covenants clearly states all exterior cleaning must use approved products and methods. The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One muttered something about civil matters under his breath. "You called the actual police for this?" James asked incredulously. Neighbors had begun to peek through windows and step onto porches, drawn by the commotion. "Environmental violations are criminal offenses," Diane replied with the confidence of someone who had memorized local ordinances specifically to weaponize them. "And this is your third violation this month." James felt his face flush. "What other violations?" Diane pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos with manicured nails. Garbage bins left out 7 hours after collection. Holiday lights still up 3 days past the January 15th deadline. And now this. James had moved to Oak Ridge Estates just 3 months ago, attracted by the well-maintained community and reasonable HOA fees. What the realtor had failed to mention was that Diane Holloway ran the Homeowners Association like her personal fiefdom, using the rulebook to torment residents who didn't meet her exacting standards. "Officers, I apologize for wasting your time," James said, turning off the hose. "I'll finish washing my car at a commercial facility." The police, clearly relieved, nodded and returned to their vehicles. As they pulled away, Diane stepped closer. "3 strikes, Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice honey-sweet but eyes cold. "The board will be discussing a fine at Thursday's meeting. I recommend you attend." As she walked away, James noticed something he hadn't before. A small camera mounted on the lamppost across the street, angled directly at his driveway. It wasn't a city camera or a security system. It had been placed to monitor this specific area. "Did you install surveillance to catch HOA violations?" he called after her. Diane turned, smiled thinly. "Community safety is our top priority. Nothing happens in Oak Ridge that I don't know about." Standing in his driveway, soap suds dry on his half-clean car, James felt something shift inside him. Not just anger, but determination. If Diane wanted to play HOA hardball, she picked the wrong opponent. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that before taking early retirement, James Mitchell had been a municipal code enforcement attorney for 22 years. He picked up the hose again, not to continue washing his car, but to water the ideas beginning to sprout in his mind. The following evening, James sat at his kitchen table surrounded by stacks of papers. HOA bylaws, county ordinances, state regulations, and printouts of emails from neighbors who had quietly reached out after the driveway incident. Each message told a similar story of Diane's selective enforcement and personal vendettas disguised as rule compliance. "Thanks for being willing to challenge her," read one email from an elderly couple 3 doors down. "We've been afraid to plant flowers because she measures the height of everything with a ruler." Another neighbor reported being fined for having a basketball hoop that was the wrong shade of black. A single mother had received multiple citations for her children's chalk drawings on their own driveway. James circled key passages in the HOA's founding documents, sticky notes sprouting from the pages like colorful flags. His former legal training was coming back in full force. He discovered that while Diane brandished Article 7, Section 12 about car washing, she had conveniently skipped Section 13, which provided exceptions for residents using less than 10 gallons of water. A knock at his door startled him. Through the peephole, he saw Maria Gonzalez from 2 houses down, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered when James opened the door, "but I thought you should see these." She handed him a folder containing HOA financial records from the past 3 years. Maria, as it turned out, was the HOA's treasurer, though Diane had gradually stripped her of meaningful oversight. "Look at the landscaping contracts," Maria suggested, "and the surveillance system installation." James flipped through the documents, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. The landscaping company, Greenscape Solutions, had been charging the HOA premium rates, nearly double the market average. A quick internet search revealed why. Greenscape was owned by Diane's brother-in-law. The surveillance cameras, which Diane had presented to the community as security measures, had been installed without proper board approval, using emergency funds meant for infrastructure repairs. "Has anyone challenged this?" James asked. Maria's bitter laugh told him everything. 3 board members tried last year. Within weeks, one had his fence replacement permit mysteriously denied, another found her garage door repeatedly reported for being non-compliant with color codes, and the third, who had a koi pond, received daily noise complaints until he resigned. James walked Maria to the door. Thank you for this. I'll be discreet. Be careful, she warned. Diane doesn't just know the rules, she knows people. The head of the permit office is her golf partner, the sheriff's deputy who responded yesterday. His wife works at Diane's real estate company. After Maria left, James returned to his research with renewed focus. The HOA meeting was just 2 days away, and he needed to be prepared. He created his spreadsheet tracking every questionable financial decision, cross-referenced with the bylaws they violated. Around midnight, a car slowly cruised past his house. Through the blinds, James recognized Diane's silver Mercedes. She was making her rounds looking for violations under cover of darkness. Instead of feeling intimidated, James smiled. Let her look. For once, someone was looking back. Thursday evening arrived with storm clouds gathering both literally and figuratively over Oak Ridge Estates. The community center buzzed with unusual energy as residents filed in for the monthly HOA meeting. Attendance was typically sparse, just Diane, her hand-picked board members, and a few retirees with nothing better to do. Tonight, however, chairs filled quickly as word had spread about James' confrontation. Diane sat at the center of the board table, arranging her papers with military precision. Her smile remained fixed as she surveyed the crowd, but her eyes narrowed at the unexpected turnout. When James entered and took a seat in the front row, her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her gavel. Let's begin, Diane announced precisely at 7:00 p.m. First item, approval of last month's minutes. James observed the choreographed meeting, how quickly they moved through the agenda items, how board members nodded in unison at Diane's subtle cues, how questions from residents were deflected with references to bylaws or promised offline discussions that never materialized. When they reached violations and fines, Diane's voice took on a practiced tone of regret. Mr. James Mitchell, 1747 Oak Ridge Lane, 3 violations in the past 30 days. Recommended fine, $750 plus mandatory compliance training. A murmur rippled through the room. The fine was steep even by Oak Ridge standards. Mr. Mitchell, do you wish to address the board? Diane asked, her tone suggesting it was merely a formality. James approached the microphone calmly, placing a single sheet of paper on the podium. Yes, thank you. Before we discuss my alleged violations, I'd like to address some procedural concerns. Diane's smile tightened. This isn't the time for. According to HOA Bylaw Article 2, Section 4, James interrupted, any resident may raise points of order regarding procedural matters before individual cases are heard. A board member whispered something to Diane, who reluctantly nodded. First, James began, the surveillance camera used to document my so-called violations was installed without proper community notification or vote, violating state privacy statute 38.175. He pointed to the financial documents projected on his tablet. Second, the $230,000 spent on these cameras was allocated from the reserve fund without the required 75% board approval. Diane's face flushed. Those were security expenditures within my discretionary authority. Which brings me to my third point, James continued. The HOA bylaws grant the president no such discretionary authority. In fact, the term doesn't appear anywhere in our governing documents. The room had gone completely silent. Even Diane's most loyal board members looked uncomfortable. Furthermore, James said, selective enforcement of regulations constitutes discriminatory practice. I've documented 47 instances where certain residents, notably board members and their families, violated the same ordinances others were fined for. He displayed a photo of Diane's own house, Christmas lights still visible in February, then another of her son washing his motorcycle in their driveway just last weekend. I move that we table all fines until an independent review of HOA practices can be conducted, James concluded. Diane stood abruptly. This meeting is adjourned due to time constraints. Actually, an elderly resident called out, according to the bylaws, meetings cannot be adjourned until all agenda items are addressed unless there's a 2/3 vote by attending members. All eyes turned to Diane, who stared at James with undisguised hostility. The storm outside chose that moment to break, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rumbled ominously in the distance. I call for an immediate vote, James said into the tense silence. Per bylaw Article 4, Section 9, any homeowner may call for a no-confidence vote in leadership with the support of 20% of attending members. Hands shot up around the room, far more than the threshold required. Diane's face contorted with fury. This is absurd. You've been here 3 months and think you understand our community better than those of us who built it. Actually, a voice called from the back. I've been here since the development broke ground. I second the motion. It was Walter Simmons, one of the original homeowners rarely seen at meetings because, as rumor had it, he and Diane had clashed years ago over his vintage car collection. Diane glanced at her most loyal board member, Trevor Phillips, expecting support. Instead, he was staring at the financial documents James had projected on the screen, particularly the line showing Greenscape Solutions had charged $12,000 for emergency tree removal during a month with no recorded storms. We should hear him out, Trevor said quietly, not meeting Diane's eyes. Fine, Diane snapped, sinking back into her chair. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Mitchell. James nodded. I'm not here to cause trouble. I moved to Oak Ridge Estates because it's a beautiful community with good people, but I've discovered concerning patterns that affect us all. He methodically outlined the selective enforcement, questionable contracts, and financial irregularities, displaying evidence on screen with each point. The surveillance system installed without proper approval. The landscaping company charging premium rates while providing substandard service. The arbitrary enforcement of rules, strict for some, overlooked for others. Most concerning, James continued, pulling up a property record, is the pattern of homeowners who challenged the board subsequently facing harassment until they sold their homes, often to LLC entities that trace back to Holloway family investments. A collective gasp filled the room. Even Trevor looked shocked. That's slander, Diane shouted, standing again. I've never forced anyone to sell. No, agreed Maria Gonzalez, suddenly standing. You just made their lives miserable until selling was the only option. Then your real estate company listed the properties and your investment group purchased them at below market rates. The room erupted in angry voices. Homeowners started sharing their own stories. Fines for infractions they didn't commit, permits mysteriously denied, approval processes stretching for months while Diane's friends received immediate green lights for identical projects. Enough, Diane shouted, repeatedly banging her gavel. This meeting is. Still in session, James interrupted calmly, and I believe we were about to vote. Trevor cleared his throat nervously. As vice president, I think we should proceed with the vote. Diane stared at him in disbelief. At 2, Trevor? It's not personal, Diane, Trevor said, though they all knew it was. It's fiduciary responsibility. The vote was taken by secret ballot, Maria and Walter counting together to ensure fairness. The result was overwhelming. 47-3 to remove Diane pending a full audit of HOA practices and finances. As the results were announced, Diane stood rigidly, gathered her designer handbag, and walked toward the exit. At the door, she turned, her expression glacial. This isn't over, she said, her voice eerily calm. Not by a long shot. The morning after the explosive HOA meeting, James woke to the mechanical growl of heavy equipment. Peering through his blinds, he spotted a bulldozer tearing up the sidewalk in front of his house. Workers in neon vests swarmed around, setting up barriers that effectively blocked his driveway. James hurried outside, still in his bathrobe. What's going on here? A foreman glanced up from his clipboard. Emergency water line repair. Should take about a week. A week? I can't access my garage. The foreman shrugged. Orders came from city utilities. Talk to them if you've got complaints. He handed James a work order bearing the signature of Raymond Holloway, Diane's husband, and not coincidentally the assistant director of public works. As James stood contemplating his next move, his phone buzzed with texts from neighbors. The water company had shut off service to Maria's house due to scheduled maintenance. Walter discovered his vintage car collection was being investigated for code violations. Trevor found his business permits under sudden review. Diane was making good on her threat, mobilizing her network of connections against anyone who had opposed her. By afternoon, an emergency meeting of the remaining HOA board convened in Trevor's garage. The mood was somber. She's going scorched earth, Trevor said, pacing nervously. My biggest client just canceled their contract this morning. Said they'd received concerning information about my business practices. My daughter was removed from the swim team, another resident added. The coach is Diane's cousin. James listened as each person detailed the retribution they faced in less than 24 hours. Diane's influence extended far beyond the HOA into local government, businesses, schools, and social organizations. Maybe we should back down, Trevor suggested. Reinstate her with limited powers, just to stop this. That's exactly what she wants, James replied. Fear is her currency. If we fold now, nothing will ever change. Walter, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. Back in '87, before Oak Ridge was built, this land belonged to my family. We sold it to developers with one condition, that it would become a community, not just houses. Diane's turned it into her personal kingdom. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Cynthia. It's Walter. I think it's time to call in that favor your paper owes me. Cynthia, As it turned out, was Cynthia Barnett, editor of the regional newspaper. Walter had once helped her expose corruption in the county commission, and she promised to return the favor someday. "We need to fight fire with fire," James said after Walter hung up. "Diane uses her connections to punish people privately. We need to make this public." Maria opened her laptop. "I've been archiving financial records for years, waiting for someone to care enough to do something." James nodded, a plan forming. "We need more. Everyone gather whatever evidence you have: emails, texts, photos of selective enforcement, records of denied permits followed by property acquisitions." Trevor looked uncertain. "You realize she'll come after all of us even harder, right?" "Yes," James acknowledged. "But there's a difference between us and Diane. We're not fighting to control people. We're fighting to free them." As they strategized into the evening, the bulldozer outside James' house continued to tear up perfectly intact sidewalk, a constant reminder of what they were up against. But for the first time in years, the residents of Oak Ridge Estates were united against a common adversary, and Diane's greatest weapon, isolation, was no longer effective. Sunday's edition of the Regional Herald featured a front-page headline that sent shockwaves through 3 counties. "Neighborhood Nightmare, HOA President's Reign of Terror." Complete with photos, financial records, and testimonials from 24 Oak Ridge residents, Cynthia Barnett's expose painted a damning picture of Diane's systematic abuse of power. By noon, local TV news vans had arrived at Oak Ridge Estates. Reporters stood on street corners, interviewing homeowners who suddenly felt emboldened to share their stories. The construction crew outside James' house mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind torn-up concrete and hastily removed equipment. James's phone rang. It was the mayor's office requesting an immediate meeting. At City Hall, James found himself seated across from Mayor Harriet Chen and the city attorney. Both looked grave. "Mr. Mitchell, these are serious allegations," Mayor Chen began, gesturing to the newspapers spread across her desk. "They're documented facts," James replied calmly. The city attorney cleared his throat. "Raymond Holloway has taken emergency leave. We're conducting an internal review of all permits and work orders related to Oak Ridge Estates." "And the police calls?" James asked. Mayor Chen's expression hardened. "I've spoken with the chief. Officers will no longer respond to HOA violations masquerading as municipal complaints." On his way out, James passed Raymond Holloway being escorted from his office, carrying a cardboard box of personal items. Their eyes met briefly before Raymond looked away, his face ashen. Back at Oak Ridge, James found a crowd gathered outside Diane's house. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, while a real estate agent hammered a "for sale" sign into her immaculate lawn. "Leaving so soon?" James asked, approaching her driveway. Diane's perfect composure had cracked. Her hair, usually styled impeccably, looked hastily arranged. Her designer outfit had been replaced by casual clothes that seemed out of character. "Enjoying your victory?" she asked, voice tight with controlled fury. "This wasn't about winning," James replied. "It was about restoring balance." Diane laughed bitterly. "You have no idea what I've protected this community from. Before me, property values were stagnant. Rentals were taking over. People parked boats in driveways and painted their houses whatever garish colors they wanted. And that justified surveillance cameras, financial self-dealing, harassing people until they sold their homes to your shell companies. I built something beautiful," she insisted. "Every decision I made was for the greater good of Oak Ridge." "No," James said quietly. "You built something that looked beautiful, but was rotting from within. There's a difference." For a moment, vulnerability flickered across Diane's face, perhaps the first genuine emotion James had seen from her. Then it vanished, replaced by steel resolve. "Mark my words, this community will fall apart without proper oversight. Standards will slip, values will decline, and when they do, people will remember my time differently." James watched as she turned and walked inside, closing the door firmly behind her. The gathered neighbors began to disperse, many stopping to thank James on their way home. Trevor approached, looking both relieved and anxious. "What happens now?" "Now," James said, "we rebuild. Not just sidewalks and permits, but trust. A community where rules exist to protect everyone equally, not to serve a few at the expense of many." "You know," Trevor admitted, "I've lived here 8 years and barely know my neighbors' names. Diane discouraged block parties, said they created too much noise and parking issues." James smiled. "I think it's time for a block party." 3 weeks later, Oak Ridge Estates was transformed. The newly elected HOA board, James had declined to run, preferring to serve as an advisory council, had immediately suspended the most restrictive and arbitrary rules pending community review. Gardens flourished with previously forbidden plants. Children's laughter echoed from backyards where basketball hoops and swing sets now stood without fear of citation. James was watering his front lawn when a silver Mercedes pulled into Diane's former driveway. But it wasn't Diane who stepped out. It was a young couple with a toddler and a golden retriever. The new owners moving in. The wife waved cheerfully as her husband struggled with a large box. "Hi, neighbor." James walked over to introduce himself, helping the husband with the unwieldy package. "I'm Aisha, this is David, and that little tornado is Zoe," the woman said, gesturing to their daughter who was already exploring the yard. "And this is Chester," she added as the golden retriever sniffed James enthusiastically. "Welcome to Oak Ridge," James replied. "You're going to like it here." The realtor told us there was some drama with the previous owner, David mentioned as they carried the box inside. Something about running the HOA like a dictator. James offered a diplomatic smile. "Let's just say the community recently went through some positive changes." Later that afternoon, as James prepared for the neighborhood's first official block party in nearly a decade, his doorbell rang. He opened it to find Trevor looking uncharacteristically nervous. "We have a situation," Trevor said. "Can you come to the community center?" When they arrived, James was surprised to find Raymond Holloway sitting alone in the meeting room, looking considerably less polished than when he worked for the city. "I'll be brief," Raymond said when James sat down. "Diane wants to sue the HOA, the newspaper, and you personally for defamation. She's lined up Harrington and Wexler to represent her." James recognized the name of the region's most aggressive and expensive law firm. "The allegations were documented and true," James replied calmly. "Truth is an absolute defense against defamation." Raymond shifted uncomfortably. "Diane doesn't see it that way. She believes her reputation was deliberately damaged to force her out." "What do you want, Raymond?" James asked directly. "I'm here unofficially," Raymond admitted. "To warn you, yes, but also to explore alternatives." "You mean a settlement?" Trevor asked. Raymond nodded. "Diane's firm will tear through this community's finances even if she ultimately loses. And trust me, she's willing to go scorched earth if it means taking you down with her." James studied Raymond's face, seeing not the confident city official who had authorized unnecessary construction to block his driveway, but a tired man caught in his wife's destructive orbit. "Why are you really here?" James asked. Raymond looked down at his hands. 27 years of marriage to Diane has been challenging. The woman you all know is the same one I live with. I've enabled her, I know that now. But this lawsuit will drain what's left of our retirement, and for what? More bitterness. "What exactly are you proposing?" James asked. "I can convince her to drop everything in exchange for a clean slate. No further articles, no criminal complaints, just peace." James glanced at Trevor, who looked relieved at the possibility of avoiding a costly legal battle, but something felt unresolved. "There's one condition," James said finally. "Diane has to come to the block party tonight and meet her former neighbors as equals, not as subjects." Raymond's eyebrows shot up. "She'll never agree to that." "Then we'll see her in court," James replied, standing to leave. Because this was never about money or rules. It was about dignity.